Alien Queen in Peril Earth's greatest warriors assemble for the rescue. The universe had always been a chaotic place. Alien empires rose and fell like tides, and war was as common as the stars themselves. But nothing in the galaxy had ever prepared the species of the known universe for the sudden disappearance of the alien queen of Zalkara. The queen wasn't just any ruler. She was the most powerful being to ever sit on a throne. Her intelligence was unmatched, her diplomatic prowess unparalleled. Under her reign, the Zalkaran people had risen from the ashes of destruction and become a respected force in galactic affairs. Known for her kindness to her allies and her ruthlessness toward her enemies, the Queen had always found a way to maintain her power. But now, her enemies had finally succeeded in trapping her. The Galactic Council, a governing body that oversaw interspecies politics, was in a panic. The Queen's capture threatened not only her empire but the delicate peace between dozens of species. Word spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Zalkaran Queen was in peril. From her cell deep within the enemy's fortress, the Queen sent a distress signal, encrypted and hidden in the vastness of space. But this message was not for just anyone. It was sent specifically to one species, humanity. The Galactic Council, despite their power, could not deny the fact that Earth was the only race capable of mounting a rescue mission. The Council had long sought to limit humanity's influence, fearing the power of Earth's warriors. But now, they had no choice. If the Queen were lost, it could signal the collapse of everything the Council had worked for. A galaxy-wide war seemed inevitable, and so humanity's most powerful warriors were called. The mission would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but it was the only hope for saving the Queen, and with her, the peace she had helped maintain. General Rachel Razor McAllister was one of the first to hear the call. She had seen the worst of war and had led Earth's forces to victory in countless battles. Her reputation as a tactical genius was known throughout the galaxy. Her name was spoken with respect and sometimes fear. She stood in the command center of the Earth Defense Fleet, staring at the holographic map in front of her. The Council had provided the details of the fortress where the Queen was being held. A massive, nearly impenetrable complex built into the surface of a barren moon in the farthest reaches of enemy space. "We can't fail," McAllister murmured to herself, barely audible over the hum of the command center's machinery. She had never failed before, and she wasn't about to start now. But this mission would be different. The stakes were higher. The entire galaxy was watching, and the future of her people depended on it. Behind her, the voices of the assembled officers grew louder. Arguments about tactics and logistics filled the air. The Council had insisted on minimal interference from Earth's leaders, but McAllister knew better. She would be taking matters into her own hands. "General, the team is ready," a voice called from behind her. McAllister turned to face her second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Merc Diaz. His face was grim, his usually jovial demeanor gone. Merc was one of the most skilled soldiers on Earth, and his experience with covert operations made him invaluable for this mission. "Good," McAllister replied, her voice steady. "Get them together. We leave in 3 hours." Merc nodded and walked away, but McAllister remained, staring at the map. She had known this day might come. The Council had been pushing humanity into the shadows for years, and the Queen's message might be the only thing that would prove the galaxy hadn't underestimated Earth's warriors. The door to the command center slid open, and a figure stepped inside. Dr. Alex "Doc" Williams, a combat medic with a reputation for healing the unhealable, walked toward McAllister. His brow furrowed as he read the map, his fingers brushing over the holographic representation of the fortress. "You're thinking too hard, Rachel," Doc said quietly, his voice almost soothing. "We can't second-guess ourselves now." "I know," McAllister said, her voice tinged with the weight of responsibility. "But we can't afford to make a mistake. The Queen's survival is paramount. If we fail, the whole galaxy could fall into chaos." Doc nodded, his usual smile replaced by a more somber expression. He had been through countless battles with McAllister, and he knew how she worked. The weight of leadership didn't seem to bother her, but this mission felt different. Even for her, this was personal. Doc placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a rare moment of reassurance. "We'll get her out, Rachel. We always do." Before McAllister could respond, a sharp voice interrupted their conversation. "General, the team is assembled," Merc said, walking back into the command center with a group of soldiers in tow. McAllister turned to face them, her eyes scanning the faces of Earth's finest warriors. This was it. They were about to embark on the most dangerous mission in Earth's history. Her team was made up of the best, each one chosen for their skills and experience. She could feel the tension in the air as they silently awaited her orders. "All right, listen up," McAllister said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "We're going in to rescue the Zalkaran Queen. Our primary objective is to get her out alive. We're not leaving anyone behind. There's no room for failure." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. The warriors before her were the best humanity had to offer. Each one of them had trained for this kind of mission their entire lives, but McAllister knew that this was unlike anything they had ever faced before. The enemy they were up against was relentless, and the fortress where the Queen was held was unlike any structure they had ever seen. But McAllister was determined to succeed, and she would make sure her team followed her lead. "We go in fast, we hit hard, and we get out. No matter what it takes." The warriors nodded, their faces set with determination. McAllister could see the resolve in their eyes. They were ready. "We'll be launching in 15 minutes, Merck said, walking back to the group of soldiers. "Prepare yourselves." As the team gathered their gear and prepared for the mission, McAllister stood in the command center for a moment longer. This was it. The fate of the Queen, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested in their hands. She knew the odds were against them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy more powerful than any they had encountered before. But she also knew that humanity's greatest strength was not in its weapons or its numbers. It was in its spirit. The warriors around her weren't just soldiers. They were survivors. And if anyone could save the Queen, it was them. The briefing room was silent as General Rachel Razor. McAllister stood in front of her assembled team, her eyes scanning the faces of Earth's greatest warriors. They were ready, but the air between them was thick with tension. Each person had been chosen for this mission because of their exceptional skills, but nothing could prepare them for what lay ahead. Razor looked around at her team. First, there was David Merck Navarro, the former mercenary turned elite soldier. His reputation was both feared and respected across the galaxy. He had no love for authority, but when the mission was on the line, he was one of the most dependable men McAllister had ever worked with. His skills in combat and his ability to improvise under pressure made him invaluable. Next to him stood Jade Viper Lee, the cybernetic ninja. Her enhancements made her faster and stronger than any human, and she had honed her skills in stealth and infiltration over the years. Despite her cold demeanor, there was something deeply human about her. She had seen too much war, too many lives lost, but she was a weapon in human form, and that was why she was here. Dr. Alex "Doc" Williams, the team's medic and biotechnical expert, was another key member. His job was simple on paper: keep everyone alive. But Doc's true value went beyond that. His expertise in alien biology meant that he could quickly adapt and respond to any situation, whether it was healing a gunshot wound or decoding an alien virus. But McAllister knew the weight of the mission was wearing on him. Doc had always been the one to question their objectives when things didn't feel right. She knew his doubts, but she trusted him. Finally, there was Isaiah Titan Onyx, the towering ex-astronaut. He was the team's powerhouse, capable of lifting an alien tank with his bare hands. He had always been the quiet one, but his actions spoke louder than words. He had seen too much death, too much destruction, and it had changed him. Yet he was still a part of this team, and McAllister knew that his strength would be crucial in the battles ahead. Each member of the team had their own reasons for joining this mission. For some, it was loyalty to humanity. For others, it was a sense of duty. But no matter their reasons, McAllister could see in their eyes that they were prepared for what was to come. The mission had been briefed. The Queen was being held in a heavily fortified fortress, surrounded by the enemy's best warriors. The plan was simple: infiltrate, extract, and escape. But the enemy they were dealing with was unlike any the team had faced before. These aliens were ruthless, genetically enhanced, and well-prepared for any assault. McAllister turned to the team. "We have one chance to make this work," she said, her voice steady. "We go in, we hit them hard, and we get out. No room for mistakes." They all nodded, their faces set in determination. The airlock doors opened, and the team stepped into the transport ship that would take them to the enemy's moon. As they suited up and secured their gear, the hum of the engines filled the cabin. Razor sat in the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls, her mind focused. She didn't have time for doubts. There was no turning back. The transport lifted off from Earth's surface, shooting into the atmosphere at breakneck speed. McAllister glanced over at Merc, who was already staring out of the window, his expression unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, but McAllister knew that he was preparing for what was ahead. He was a mercenary at heart, and the danger only made the mission more exciting for him. Jade sat in the corner, her enhanced eyes scanning the ship's interior. She wasn't one for small talk, but McAllister knew her well enough to understand that Jade was already calculating the risks, already thinking 5 steps ahead. Doc was running diagnostics on his medical gear, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was the calmest one of them all, but McAllister could tell that the weight of the mission was starting to get to him. He was a man who believed in saving lives, but sometimes war didn't allow for that luxury. Titan, as usual, was silent, his massive frame taking up most of the space. But McAllister knew his mind was working. He was preparing himself for the physical and emotional toll the mission would take. The journey to the fortress felt long, though it only took a few hours. The team was silent, each person lost in their thoughts, preparing for what was to come. As the transport approached the enemy's moon, Razor felt her pulse quicken. This was it. The Queen's life was in their hands, and the success of the mission depended on their unity and skill. The transport touched down on the outskirts of the fortress, a vast structure built into the side of a barren mountain. Razor and her team exited the ship, stepping into the cold, desolate landscape. The ground was cracked and dry with little sign of life. It was a harsh, unforgiving place, much like the enemies they were about to face. The team moved quickly, staying low to avoid detection. They were equipped with the best stealth technology Earth had to offer, but they knew it wouldn't be enough to keep them hidden for long. The enemy was always watching, always ready for an attack. "Move out," McAllister ordered, her voice sharp. They advanced as one unit, their movements precise and coordinated. McAllister led the way, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Viper was already ahead, her enhanced senses alert for any signs of danger. Merc followed closely behind, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm, ready for anything. Titan brought up the rear, his massive frame ensuring no one could sneak up on them. As they neared the fortress, they saw the first sign of the enemy, a group of heavily armed guards patrolling the outer perimeter. They were taller than most species, their bodies rippling with muscle and enhanced implants. Their armor was sleek and dark, designed for both protection and intimidation. Razor signaled for the team to stop. "Viper, you're up," she whispered. Jade nodded, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the guards. Without a word, she slipped into the shadows, her movements smooth and silent. She was the best at what she did, an unseen force that struck from the darkness. Moments later, the first guard dropped silently to the ground, a single dart lodged in his neck. Jade moved quickly, taking out the other guards one by one, using her advanced cybernetic enhancements to move faster than the eye could follow. The rest of the team remained hidden, waiting for the signal. Once Jade had taken care of the last guard, Razor motioned for them to move forward. They reached the entrance of the fortress, where a heavily fortified door stood between them and their objective. Doc pulled out a small device, his fingers flying over it as he worked to hack into the security system. His brow furrowed as he encountered unexpected resistance. "We've got company," Doc muttered. "They've upgraded their systems. I need a few more minutes." Razor nodded, her eyes scanning the area. They couldn't afford to be caught. If the alarm was triggered, the entire fortress would be alerted to their presence. "We don't have a few minutes," McAllister said, her voice tense. "Hurry up, Doc." Doc's hands moved faster, the device clicking and whirring as it bypassed the security locks. Finally, the door slid open with a low hiss, and the team moved inside. The interior of the fortress was just as cold and unforgiving as the outside. The walls were made of a smooth, metallic surface, and the dim lights flickered overhead. Razor led the way, her senses on high alert. They were in, but the real danger had only just begun. The air inside the fortress was thick with tension. Razor led the team through a series of narrow hallways, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The soft click of their boots echoed through the empty corridors, but it was the silence that unnerved them all. The fortress was eerily quiet, too quiet. Every step they took felt like it was being watched. The team moved as one, their formations tight and coordinated. They had trained for this, drilled it countless times. They knew how to move through hostile environments without alerting anyone. But there was something about this place, something about the cold, metallic walls that made even the most experienced soldiers uneasy. Razor paused at a corner, her hand raised in a silent command. The rest of the team stopped immediately, waiting for her signal. She scanned the next hallway, her senses on high alert. The walls were lined with security cameras, but they didn't seem to be functioning. It was almost as if the enemy was expecting them, or worse, not expecting them at all. "Clear," Razor whispered. "Move out." They continued their advance, but the deeper they went into the fortress, the more dangerous it became. The halls seemed to stretch on forever, and with each step, the air grew colder. The walls, once smooth and featureless, began to take on a more sinister appearance. Jagged markings, alien symbols, and strange textures covered the surfaces, as if this place had been built by a race with no regard for human understanding. "Something's off," Merc said under his breath. His hand rested on the grip of his sidearm, and his eyes were constantly shifting, taking in every detail. "It's too easy." "It's a trap," Jade said, her voice low but sharp. Her enhanced eyes flicked over every corner, every shadow. "We're being herded." Razor nodded, her mind racing. She had thought the same thing. The lack of resistance so far was unnerving. The enemy had to know they were here. They had to be setting them up for something. They reached a large metal door at the end of the hall. Razor motioned for the team to stop. She approached the door cautiously, pressing her ear against it, listening for any sounds from the other side. There was nothing, no movement, no voices, not even the hum of machinery. Doc stepped forward, pulling out a small device from his pack. He began working on the door's lock, his fingers moving quickly as he bypassed the security system. The rest of the team remained silent, watching the hallway for any signs of movement. "Doc, hurry up," McAllister muttered, glancing at her watch. They didn't have much time before the enemy realized they were there. Every second that passed made the mission more dangerous. "I'm trying," Doc replied, his voice tight. "This place has the most advanced encryption I've ever seen. It's like they knew we'd be coming." Razor's thoughts raced. If the enemy had been expecting them, that meant they knew about the Queen's distress signal. But how? "Got it," Doc said, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was dark, but the faint glow of alien symbols illuminated the space. Razor moved in first, her senses alert. The rest of the team followed, weapons ready. They had entered a large chamber, its walls covered in strange alien writing and designs. In the center of the room, suspended in a force field, was the alien queen herself. She was unconscious, her body limp, but there was no mistaking who she was. The queen's regal features were unmistakable, even in her weakened state. "Finally," McAllister whispered. She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the queen. But just as she moved closer, the room's lights flickered to life, and the sound of heavy boots echoed through the chamber. Razor froze. This wasn't right. The ambush had begun. "Get down," Merc shouted, pushing Doc to the floor just as a barrage of laser fire lit up the space where they had been standing. The team scattered, diving for cover as the walls exploded with energy blasts. "Ambush," Razor yelled. "Take cover." The enemy had arrived. The moment they had feared was here. A dozen heavily armored warriors, each towering over 6 feet tall, stormed into the room. Their bodies were a mix of muscle and cybernetic enhancements, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Jade moved first, darting from one piece of cover to the next with inhuman speed. She threw a series of small, deadly blades, each one finding its mark in the necks of 2 advancing guards. They fell without a sound. Merc followed closely behind her, his weapon flashing as he took down another 2 guards with precise shots. His experience as a mercenary made him a deadly force in these kinds of battles. Titan was next. With a roar, he charged into the fray, his fists hammering into the chest of one of the enemy soldiers. The impact was so strong that the soldier flew across the room, slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. But despite their initial success, the enemy continued to pour into the room. The team had underestimated their numbers. There were more of them than they had anticipated, and each one was a formidable opponent. "Doc, get to the Queen," Razor shouted. She fired her rifle, taking down another enemy soldier. "We'll hold them off." Doc nodded, not hesitating for a second. He ran toward the Queen, his hands moving quickly to deactivate the force field. But as he approached, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from behind him. One of the alien soldiers, faster than the rest, had flanked them. "Doc, look out!" Jade shouted. Doc turned just in time to see the soldier charging toward him, a large energy blade raised. Without thinking, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small device. He threw it at the soldier's feet, and a burst of blinding light erupted. The soldier staggered back, temporarily blinded. Doc didn't waste a second. He lunged forward, grabbing the soldier's arm and twisting it. The enemy soldier screamed as the bones cracked, but Doc didn't let go. With one swift motion, he incapacitated the soldier, then returned to his task. "Force field down," Doc said, his voice shaky. "The Queen's free." Razor, Merc, and the others continued to fight back, taking down wave after wave of enemy soldiers. They were outnumbered, but they refused to give up. The team had come too far, and they weren't going to let the Queen fall into enemy hands again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the enemy soldiers fell. Razor wiped the sweat from her brow and scanned the room. The Queen was safe, but the mission wasn't over yet. The team had to get out, and they had to do it fast. "We've got her," McAllister said, panting. "Now let's get the hell out of here." The team gathered around the Queen, securing her safely on a stretcher. They moved quickly, exiting the chamber and retracing their steps through the fortress. The alarms were blaring now, and they knew the enemy would be coming for them with everything they had. They had no time to waste. As they made their way back to the transport, McAllister's mind raced. The enemy had known they were coming, but how? And who else might be watching? "Razor," Merc said, his voice low. "I think we've just opened Pandora's box." McAllister glanced back at him, her face hardening. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, we get the Queen to safety." But deep down, she knew the mission had only just begun. The escape was supposed to be simple. They had come in, rescued the Queen, and were now on their way out, but nothing ever went as planned. The alarms were blaring across the fortress, their harsh sound reverberating through the narrow hallways. Razor could hear the echo of their footsteps pounding in the silence that followed, but it was the footsteps behind them, the ones that were growing louder, that made her stomach drop. The enemy was mobilizing. "Pick it up," Razor shouted, her voice sharp as she glanced over her shoulder. The team was moving quickly, but every passing second was another chance for the enemy to regroup and close in on them. "We don't have much time." The Queen was strapped to a stretcher, surrounded by Doc and Titan. Doc was working quickly to stabilize the Queen's condition, his hands steady despite the chaos. Titan, the giant of the group, was moving at a near sprint, his large frame making him an easy target, but also an unstoppable force. Merc and Jade brought up the rear, covering their backs and keeping watch for any sign of enemy movement. "Razor," Merc called out, his voice low but urgent. "They're closing in fast. We won't make it to the ship if we keep moving at this pace." Razor's mind raced. They were near the entrance, but the enemy was relentless. It was clear they had more reinforcements on the way. Razor had known this wasn't going to be easy, but the resistance they were facing was greater than they had expected. The whole operation felt like a trap from the start, but now there was no time to wonder about their mistakes. They had to get out, now. "We need to take a shortcut," Razor said, turning to Merc. "Head for the lower levels. We can cut through the ventilation shafts." Merc frowned. "That's risky. We don't know what we're walking into down there." "We don't have a choice," Razor replied. "We either take the risk or we die trying to get out the way we came in." Merc hesitated for a second before nodding. "Right, let's move." The team made their way down a side corridor, taking a sharp left toward a service door that led to the maintenance shaft. Razor's mind never stopped calculating their options. The fortress was huge, and every hall felt like it could lead them into another trap. But they had no choice. The ventilation system was their best chance at getting out without encountering any more heavily armed enemies. As they reached the door, Doc and Titan paused, and Razor quickly turned to them. "Keep the Queen safe. We'll get you out." Doc nodded, though his face was tight with concern. The Queen had stabilized, but she was still unconscious. Every moment they spent in enemy territory put her at greater risk. Titan, the giant, looked down at the Queen with a mix of reverence and determination. He wasn't one to speak much, but Razor could see the weight of the mission in his eyes. "Let's move," she said. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they entered the maintenance shaft. The narrow space smelled of oil and rust, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the cramped passage. They were forced to move in single file, and Razor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Watch your heads," Jade muttered, as she slipped past Razor, her agility allowing her to move faster than the rest of the team. They made their way down the shaft, weaving through a series of tight corners and low ceilings. The ventilation system of the fortress was vast, and Razor knew it like the back of her hand. She had studied the schematics before the mission, but the reality of moving through it was more difficult than she had imagined. Every step felt like it could be their last. "We've got company," Merc whispered, his voice barely audible. Razor glanced ahead, her pulse quickening. In the darkness ahead, she could see the faint outline of movement, shadows that were too large, too deliberate to be anything but enemies. Razor raised her rifle, motioning for the team to stop. She had to think fast. They couldn't fight their way out of here. The shaft was too narrow, and there were too many of them. "We're going to have to take them out quietly," Razor said in a low voice. "Jade, you're up." Jade didn't need another word. She moved like a shadow, slipping forward with such speed that the rest of the team barely registered her departure. A few seconds later, the sound of soft thuds echoed from the darkness as Jade eliminated the first two enemies with quick, precise strikes. Razor motioned for the rest of the team to follow, and they continued forward, moving faster now that the immediate danger had passed. But the deeper they went into the maintenance shaft, the more oppressive the silence became. Razor's mind was sharp, but the tension was beginning to wear on her. She could feel her heart rate picking up, each breath coming harder than the last. They were close to the exit, but the enemy was still on their tail. Suddenly, the sound of a metal door sliding open echoed from behind them. Razor froze, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. "Get down!" Merc shouted. The team dropped to the floor just as a series of energy blasts lit up the walls above them. The force of the shots rattled the ventilation shafts, shaking loose dust and debris. Razor's breath caught in her throat as she tried to assess the situation. There were more enemies, and they were right behind them. They had to move, or they would be trapped. "Jade, take the lead," Razor ordered, her voice firm. "Merc, cover us." Jade didn't hesitate, launching herself down the shaft with a speed that left the rest of the team scrambling to keep up. Merc followed close behind, his gun raised and ready, while Razor and Titan ensured that the Queen and Doc were shielded from the gunfire. They turned a corner, and the shaft opened into a wide, dimly lit room filled with alien machinery. It was a massive control center, with large panels and glowing consoles lining the walls. Razor's eyes immediately went to the large metal doors at the far end of the room. "Exit S ahead," she muttered, but as they moved toward the door, the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. "Not good," Merc said, his voice tense. "Get the Queen through the door," Razor ordered. "We'll hold them off." Merc and Doc didn't hesitate. They began moving the Queen toward the door while Razor, Jade, and Titan turned to face the approaching enemy. The first wave of enemy soldiers rounded the corner, their weapons raised. Razor didn't wait for them to take the first shot. She fired, dropping the first soldier with a clean shot to the chest. Titan roared, charging toward the enemy and taking down two more soldiers with brutal force. Jade darted between the enemies, using her speed and agility to take down three more before they could react. Merc's shots rang out in perfect synchronization with the rest of the team's efforts, but there were too many of them. "Razor, we need to move now," Merc shouted as more enemy reinforcements poured into the room. Razor's heart was pounding in her chest. The Queen had to be secured, but they were running out of time. "Go," she ordered, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Get the Queen to the ship, we'll cover you." With one last look, Razor turned and fired at the enemy, providing cover for the rest of the team as they made their way to the exit. She knew it wasn't over yet. They still had a long way to go, and the enemy was closing in. But they had made it this far. They had come too far to turn back now. As the team pushed forward, the world around them seemed to blur into a whirlwind of gunfire, explosions, and chaos. But through it all, Razor knew one thing: they had to survive. The Queen's life depended on it. The fate of the galaxy might depend on it. They were not going down without a fight. The escape had turned into a nightmare. The team was running out of time. The enemy was closing in, and Razor's mind raced with calculations. Every step felt heavier, every breath more labored. They had the Queen, but the fortress was still alive with hostile forces. and the distance to the extraction point seemed farther than it had ever been. They burst through the final door, finding themselves in a massive hangar, the sleek metallic walls reflecting the harsh red glow of the emergency lights. Razor's heart skipped a beat when she saw the transport ship waiting at the far end of the room, but it was too far. The enemy had anticipated their route and was already positioned to cut them off. "Move," Razor barked. "We're almost there." Titan was the first to break into a sprint, his massive frame barreling through the hangar with the Queen secured on a stretcher, followed closely by Doc. Merc and Jade flanked them, guns drawn, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Razor stayed at the rear, her senses heightened, ears straining for the sounds of enemy soldiers. The first wave of enemy soldiers appeared at the far entrance of the hangar, their armor gleaming under the emergency lights. They were moving in a disciplined, coordinated formation, and Razor knew they were not going to make it out easily. The odds had shifted again, and this time they were against them. "Get to the ship," Razor yelled again, her voice filled with urgency. Merc fired off a few rounds, keeping the enemy soldiers pinned down. The blast of his weapon echoed through the hangar as the shot struck one of the approaching soldiers in the chest. Jade darted between crates and debris, her enhanced agility making her a blur of motion. She dropped another 2 soldiers with precision before disappearing behind cover, taking out the next wave before they had even known she was there. But it wasn't enough. The enemy kept coming, relentless and determined. "Doc, hurry up!" Razor shouted. Doc was doing his best to keep the Queen stable, but it wasn't easy. Her condition was deteriorating, and every second that passed felt like a lifetime. "I need a minute," Doc called back, his voice strained as he worked. "We don't have a minute," Merc shouted back. Titan reached the ship's door first and began pushing it open. But the moment he did, another barrage of energy blasts hit the hangar, sending sparks flying from the walls. Razor instinctively moved into position, using the debris to shield herself from the incoming fire. "Get inside now," Razor shouted. Doc and Titan rushed into the ship with Jade and Merc close behind. The ship's engines began to hum to life and Razor's pulse quickened. They were almost there. They were almost safe. But as Razor turned to board the ship, she felt the unmistakable pressure of an ambush. Soldiers were appearing from every corner of the hangar, closing in around them. The air was filled with the sound of their footsteps, the clatter of armor, and the heavy hum of energy weapons charging. "Not now," Razor muttered under her breath, but it didn't matter. They were out of options. She turned back to the ship's entrance, firing her weapon as she went, her hands steady as she took down 2 soldiers with well-placed shots. Titan was already inside, covering their escape with a barrage of his own. Merc and Jade joined in, firing their weapons as they moved to the entrance, but the enemy was too well armed. They were surrounded, and Razor's mind raced for a way out. Then something unexpected happened. The doors at the far end of the hangar exploded inward with a deafening crash, and a massive armored vehicle rolled through the wreckage, its cannons blazing. Razor's heart skipped. It was humanity's reinforcements, a last-ditch effort to get them out of there. "About damn time," Merc shouted with a grin. The vehicle plowed through the hangar, its cannons tearing through the enemy soldiers, sending them scattering in all directions. The team ducked behind cover as the vehicle made its way toward them, blasting through anything in its path. The noise was deafening, and the ground shook under their feet. "Move, move, move," Razor ordered. The team sprinted toward the vehicle, their footsteps pounding against the hangar floor. Razor felt the weight of the Queen's safety in her hands, but as the team neared the armored vehicle, she saw the soldiers regrouping and preparing to make their final stand. The vehicle's arrival had thrown them off balance, but the fight was far from over. "Doc, I need that Queen awake," Razor shouted, but she already knew it was a long shot. Doc was doing everything he could, but the Queen's vital signs were weak. She was no longer responding to his attempts to stabilize her, and that knowledge weighed heavily on his mind. But he kept pushing, knowing that if he gave up, it would cost them everything. The armored vehicle finally came to a stop at the team's position, and the doors opened. The team rushed inside, with Titan, Jade, and Merc covering the retreat. Razor was the last to enter, taking one last look over her shoulder at the enemy forces closing in on them. But as the vehicle's doors slammed shut, the sound of gunfire and explosions continued to echo through the hangar. Razor's heart raced as she looked around. They were safe for now, but their escape was far from guaranteed. "Get us out of here," Razor ordered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. The vehicle's engines roared to life, and the team was thrown back into their seats as it shot forward, cutting through the hangar at breakneck speed. The ground rumbled beneath them as they broke through the outer walls of the fortress, flying through the air as the vehicle cleared the debris and the wreckage. But even as they made their way to safety, Razor couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. The enemy wasn't done yet. They had underestimated humanity before, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The Queen's capture and rescue had revealed far more than anyone had expected. As the vehicle rocketed toward their extraction point, Razor turned to face Doc, who was still working on the Queen. The situation had become even more critical than before. The Queen's life was hanging by a thread, and if they didn't get her the medical attention she needed, the mission would be a failure. And yet, as they neared their destination, Razor couldn't help but feel the weight of the bigger picture. This mission wasn't just about saving the Queen. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They had shown their power, their resilience, and their ability to face impossible odds. The Queen had seen that firsthand. But Razor knew that the galaxy was watching, and whatever happened next, humanity's place in it was about to change forever. As the vehicle touched down on the landing pad, Razor glanced out the window. Their mission had been successful, but the war was far from over. The enemy would regroup and new threats would arise. But for now they had won. They had survived.